Well, I think I promised 2 videos, and here's number 3. I hope you're liking it. I hope this is engaging. I'm not even sure how this is showing up for you. Um, I'm enjoying doing this in the backyard here. So here's number 3. And finally, we get to our key terms. All right, leadership. I want to make it just a simple distinction as far as, and again, everything I'm sharing, I'm sorry I didn't say this sooner. It's just from my own experience. I can only speak from my own experience. I cannot speak in some way for you. Let me just say that. I'm speaking from what I see, what I learn. I'll do my best to cite the text. The textbook says this, the textbook points us to that. And we all have to draw on our own experiences. And I just encourage you to do the same. And if your experience is different than mine, and if your experience is different in class, wonderful. Then we'll have a diversity of experiences, and then we could really learn. So that's my preface. So what do I understand the difference between leadership and management to be? Well, first, a little history. Before the Industrial Revolution, management wasn't studied. There weren't people, there were schools, but there weren't management degrees per se. There weren't that many people who consider themselves managers. The term wasn't as widely used. But the Industrial Revolution, with the great scaling of production, owners of manufacturing in particular needed lots of managers to run different wings of their manufacturing operations. So management became more important. And it is a very top-down system, so the way management developed is in a very top-down hierarchical system. Management had already existed certainly in the military and certainly in religious organizations, but now in business, management became even more important with the Industrial Revolution. The first business school emerged in 1881. It was at Harvard University, the Wharton School of Business. So the first time there's a business school saying this is worth studying now, 1881. The scholarly journal, the Harvard Business Review, first emerged in 1922. So it's less than 100 years that scholarly articles, that reflection on business is occurring. But something happened in the 1960s and 70s, societal, perhaps global, but certainly in the U.S., widespread disillusionment with leadership, political leadership. We had a president resign, heading toward impeachment. We had a war exposed in Vietnam, and we started to hear more and more through the media, through a new power in the 60s, the media, communicating to many people what's going on in this war, showing pictures, and then communicating the difference between what the government is saying and what's actually happening. So there's this growing, the trust of the 50s ended, and a growing mistrust in leadership in the 60s and 70s continued and has continued to this day. And certainly in business, with increasing number of environmental disasters, scandals, trust in business leadership has also come into scrutiny. So a new field of study has emerged, about 40 years old now, called leadership studies. And a group of scholars have suggested that leadership is distinct from management. You could lead and not necessarily be a manager. You could be a manager and not necessarily be a leader. So the question started being raised, what makes for good leadership? What makes for ethical leadership? Hence this course. So there's a growing distinction between leadership and management. They can very much be one and the same, and at their best, they're one and the same. So in identifying leadership, the word to lead comes from an Old English word, laden, and it's related to the Old English word folden. Laden and folden were two things you could do on a journey. Sometimes one person would be in laden and others would be in folden, but sometimes one of the folden would jump up and be the laden. So leaders and followers would shift as the journey went along. Maybe in a journey there would be one main leader. Maybe it would shift. But leadership had to do with a journey that people were doing together. That's the core, the root of the word. It's a journey that people are doing together. Management, what the dictionary tells us, has to do with direction, being the head, being a manager, and more have to do with control. Less to do with a journey and more to do with an operation. So just two distinctions between those words, leadership and management. Regarding using the textbook, I'm going to invite you to read the textbook and dialogue with the textbook. The textbook will name a chunk of facts, a chunk of things that happened that are historical and verifiable. The textbook will also have its opinions. The three authors are human beings. They're going to convey their opinions. It's up to you, the reader, to really say, is that a fact or is that opinion? To be clear about the difference, an important skill. Particularly in our society, if we want to create a coherent society, We need to distinguish for ourselves our own thinking, what's fact, what's opinion, and when we hear it from others. So I just encourage you to not take all the opinions you hear in the textbook and just assume they're the same as facts, assume there's true. Balance it with your own experience. Here's one example. On page 2, the textbook says, businesses have served most market-based societies well. I would say that's an opinion. The opinion is, businesses have served most market-based societies well. The question might be, have they? Have they actually, in fact? And to answer that question, you might want to ask 2 questions. How have they served? Name it. Give some evidence. How have they served market-based societies well? Give some evidence. How have they not served market-based societies well? Give some evidence. And then you could weigh the evidence and draw a better conclusion. So as you read the text, approach it critically. Separate fact from opinion. Some key definitions. Sustainability. I like, there's several definitions, I believe, on page 5. I think the last one is the one sounded simplest to me. I like simple. 3 layers of sustainability. One has to do with the financial sustainability of the firm. The second has to do with the sustainability of the planet and ecosystems, environmental sustainability. And the third has to do with social equity. Is what we're doing positively contributing to society, creating more equity, creating a more sustainable society. So 3 layers of sustainability: financial for the firm, societal for humans, and then environmental for all of creation. The book describes society as a purposeful aggregation of people. I like that a lot. It includes lots of layers: groups, organizations, institutions, and more. I won't name them now, but you might want to either pause this here or at the end of this video, just ask yourself, what are the elements of society? I may have named a few. What would you say are all the elements of society? Let's look at the word ethical. I would define ethical as having to do with knowing what's good and doing what's good. So knowing the good and doing the good. The dictionary online tells me ethical has to relate to moral principles and to conforming to an acceptable code of conduct. Here's the key question with ethics, though. Is this acceptable code of conduct, is it a socially acceptable code? Is it a code that's acceptable by all? So for something to be ethical, does it need to be recognized by your society as ethical? How about just your subgroup? My subgroup views this as ethical, but not society. Is that enough? Or just me personally, I think this was an okay thing to do. I think this was right. I don't care what society or my subgroup thinks. What would make a decision ethical? So maybe that's enough for now. Those are some terms just to get you started thinking. The term leadership I gave you, the term ethical I gave you, the term society I offered, and the term business I think I mentioned earlier. It includes nonprofit and for-profit businesses. Within for-profit, there's different kinds based on size and ownership. Go get them.